Senator Allen.
Okay, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your very informative presentation. The first question is for my information. It's a simple question. It's my understanding that the city of Los Angeles has decided to ban all fracking within the city boundaries. Is that correct? And does that impact this Inglewood oil and gas field?
The City Council of Los Angeles has instructed their city attorney to draft a regulation that would basically ban fracking in the boundaries of the city. Okay,
so this Inglewood oil and gas field, does that go within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles?
Parts of it, yes.
And do you have any sense of how this proposed council legislation might impact that field? Is there grandfathering in? Would it end all activities? Does the city have the right to do that?
Well, first of all, there is no grandfathering of any permitting. As Dr. Bolin mentioned, our permits are good for 1 year. Okay, if you don't start, you have to start again. Secondly, I can't predict what, it's primarily Freeport-McMoRan operates the Inglewood field. And it is my understanding that they use very little of hydraulic fracture technology and almost no acidization technology because of the geology in that field.
So it may end up being that it doesn't impact their oil extraction.
Yeah, I actually couldn't speak for Freeport-McMoRan, but I suspect it would be minimal.
Okay, all right. Wanted to ask you a little bit about air quality impacts. I know that CARB is in the process of developing regulations for methane emissions, and believes that these regulations might reduce other pollutants as well. So I just wanted to get a sense of how these regulations might impact well stimulation and or help mitigate resulting air pollution relating to well stimulation.
In terms of the air impacts associated specifically with well stimulation, is that your question?
Yeah.
My understanding, having read not all 1,200 pages, but pretty close, in the EIR, much is described. There were specific studies done at hydraulic fracturing sites to look at everything from airborne particulates to criteria gases, et cetera. There is apparently a very, very low amount of air impact associated strictly with well stimulation.
Okay. So are you in close touch with CARB as they're developing these emissions regulations as they may relate to well stimulation, or is you just going to sort of see what they come up with?
Well, I would say that we're pretty much cheek by jowl with most of our sibling agencies. With every one of the development, the technical committees, we have a representative. They've had representatives at our meetings as well. So we pretty much are tracking closely what they do. We don't have air resource engineers on our staff, so we leave it to their expertise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Let me ask you also about hazardous waste. I know that SB 4 requires oil and gas operators to determine whether or not their activities generate hazardous waste. Would love to just sort of get your explanation of this process with regard to the determination of hazardous waste production.
Right. The permanent regulations actually have a very extensive list of what we call analytes, which is basically what you're looking at in a water quality sample, for example. And it is, in fact, Jonathan Bishop is far more qualified to talk about this than I am, but we actually use the lists that were recommended by the State Water Resources Control Board to include what you must look for, and on that list are several things that would determine whether or not it's a hazardous waste.
Okay, so maybe I'll follow up more with Jonathan when he speaks. Let me just refer again to this article that Senator Jackson made reference to a little earlier. And I know that it has a lot to do with water, and maybe we can talk when Mr. Bishop speaks. But and I know that this is largely based on information involving Dogger that mistakes made at Dogger long before you got there. So this is certainly not meant to be any criticism of you, Mr. Bolin, but it really is pretty extraordinary what was cited in the LA Times. I mean, I know that the EPA called the state's errors shocking. said that the oil field wastewater injection program had been mismanaged and didn't comply with Safe Drinking Water Act. Talked about chaotic record keeping, antiquated data collection. So just wanted to get a sense from you about, what we're doing on the record keeping side, all of these challenges. I mean, the article's quite substantial and gets into all of this haphazard record keeping and I just want to get your thoughts on this article because I've been getting letters about it from people in my district.
Well, right, I understand that. And so let's, first of all, this is a broader topic, and my understanding is we're going to have a hearing on this in March.
March 10th.
But let me simply say a couple of things. First of all, there are some concerns, serious concerns that I have that have hit me when I walk in the door and have started to ask a lot of questions, a lot of hard questions. What I hope you're seeing, though, is that this is the new division. What you're seeing is the new division. I have been asked by the governor to come in and look carefully at the division and bring it up to par. It has a lot of problems. I am working to fix those problems. I will happy to talk with you about a lot of the changes that we're making. We're reorganizing some staff so that we have more people in the field and inspections. We do have a serious data management problem. We have no modern data management system, none, zero. That's a big problem and a big challenge for us. But our problems are on the table, and I'm not hiding from them. The division is not hiding from them. Our letter and our plan to the EPA in cooperation with the Water Board is a very serious plan to move us very quickly as possible back into compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. The accusations made in the article this morning are not entirely correct. They conflate two issues that are not, they're really not that connected. And to be very specific, benzene is expected to come back when you enter a hydrocarbon reservoir. That's something you expect. I've had my engineering staff look at our data. None of the reports for the data that we have shows that the operators used benzene as in any of the makeup fluid for hydraulic fracturing, number one. Number two, the wells that are of concern, those wells that are out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act and are injecting into zones that have less than 3,000 TDS. By the way, that's not drinking water. That water still needs considerable treatment in order to be drinking water. Those wells, with the exception of 7, are far enough away from where hydraulic fracturing is taking place that we are absolutely confident that none of those wells have hydraulic fracturing fluid going in them. The 7 that are even close are almost certainly, I can't say 100% with 100% certainty, but almost certainly not receiving fluid from hydraulically fractured flowback water. The reason is companies don't like to move water very far. They actually like to put it right back down into the reservoir from which it came. So that article conflates a lot of issues that are complicated, and I'm happy to discuss it with you at a later date.
So this may be an example of the conflation, but I'm just explaining to me because I'm having trouble, I guess, squaring what you just said with one line from the article, which is that the raw data compiled by the Center for Biological Diversity showed that 98% of wastewater samples taken from 329 fracked oil wells exceeded federal and state water quality standards for benzene concentrations.
That's correct. That may be correct. I didn't analyze I don't know what the analysis was of the CBD, but it's not a surprise that when you hydraulically fracture a zone from which you hope to extract oil in economic quantities, that you're going to have benzene in that water.
Because it's just present in oil well areas.
Yeah.
So this kind of gets to, so let me get one other thing kind of straight in my mind. You and the doctor before who spoke on the earlier panel seemed to suggest that benzene's not being used in the actual fracking process. The article, maybe this is incorrect, but it says benzene is often part of the chemical cocktail injected into oil-bearing formations to break open fissures for oil or gas to escape. So are you saying that
I'm not familiar with what goes on all across the country in detail. What I am familiar with is what our data show, and that's what's required by the interim SB4 regulations. Our data show that operators have reported that no benzene is used in the chemical mixture that forms a very small part of the hydraulic fracturing fluid.
Okay, so you're disagreeing with the
I
article's
disagree completely with the
characterization, at least for
statement
California.
in that article. I think it's false with respect to the state of California.
Okay.
That is, the data for the last year demonstrate that that's false for the
That's
state of
part
California.
of the challenge is we have data for the last year, not over multiple years.
And in some ways, some of these test results, it's old data, right? I mean, it's no.
What do you mean? No, the test results that we're receiving are are results of activities that have gone on during this year. So this is part of the SB4 regulatory framework and the data collection, which, by the way, is in a publicly available website on the Dogger website, part of transparency.
So have they stopped using benzene, or is this something, or is it just the reporter just kind of?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that I don't know where benzene is used, if it is used. I know in the state of California, we require that the operators tell us what goes into their fracture fluid chemistry. Benzene is not reported as one of those chemicals.
Okay. Could you give me just a better sense also of Dogger's relationship with the EPA? And
it is a close relationship. So we have a formal relationship because the responsibility for regulating underground injection control as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act is delegated to the state, and the Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources is the state agency responsible for the administration of the underground injection control program. This is very common. Most oil and gas entities that regulate oil and gas in the various states have the primacy for oversight of underground injection control. Beyond that, we have a close relationship with the EPA. I and Jonathan and others have been meeting with the EPA on almost a biweekly or every 3-week basis. We have their letters that come to us are the result of discussions that we've had. We have complete coordination with them. We're working with them to move the state back in compliance with Safe Drinking Water Act. So it's a close partnership. I know it doesn't sound like it in the article occasionally, but it is, in fact, a close partnership. I talk with those folks all the time.
one other question, I noticed in the article that it talked about the fact that while the EPA has the authority to administer federal water laws, there was a 1983 agreement that gave California the responsibility for monitoring water quality in its injection well program.
That's the delegation that I just referred to. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, so does that exist, how many other states have that sort of delegation, do you know?
A large number.
So it's a common practice?
It's common practice, yes, sir.
Okay, and that's done as a,
It's done primarily because the states can do it better than the federal government can in this instance, where the people who regulate oil and gas are very close to, and it's not always oil and gas. In some states, there's also water regulatory agencies that do it, but they're very close to the action. They know what's going on in detail. They're connected with the state in ways that the federal government can't be. So it makes sense for the federal government to do it this way.
okay, all right. And then finally, given the fact that we've got this record-keeping challenge, so many of these files exist only on paper, is there a concerted effort underway now to try to digitize a lot of these records to make them more easily?
Certainly, Senator. The article is a little bit stretched in saying that we have no record keeping whatsoever. In fact, every well in the state of
It just says
California.
haphazard.
It's not haphazard. It's actually, I meant to actually grab a typical well file on my way over here. They're typically about this thick. And what that means is every time there is an operation or every time a new contractor comes to the well, they add information to the well file. Our history in the division has only recently gone to transferring an enormous amount of information into actual data that can be analyzed. So in the last 6 years, we have 3 large databases that aren't necessarily fully compatible with each other, but we have a lot of data, but it refers to the information in those well files. Over the last 3 years, we have completed scanning all of the 250,000 well files that are in Dogger's collection.
Okay, it sounds like you guys are going to have to write a comprehensive letter to the editor to raise, because you seem to disagree with all sorts of fundamental
We did,
claims
and
being made.
such a conversation was had with the environmental editor of the LA Times before we came over here.
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate your answers, and I look forward to this March 10th
on the editorial.
opportunity to further explore these challenges.
Thank you, Senator.
A few minor follow-up questions from myself before we hear from Mr. Bishop on all things water. You had said that some water agencies in some states have the authority regarding the regulation of underground injection wells?
I believe that to be the case, but probably only, different states regulate things differently. And
Right.
so in some cases, oil and gas and water are all under the same department. So it just depends. It's a state by state.
Pennsylvania is a typical example where the Department of Environmental Protection is basically their water board
Right.
and their
I
oil
know
and gas operation.
the way we set things up are sometimes different. One thing about, under Senate Bill 4, is all the costs regarding the studies, the draft EIR, personnel, whatever you need, you could request through your annual appropriation or recommendation an increase in the per barrel fee.
Yes, that's
Do you
correct.
have enough people in the ground, whether it's data management that Senator Allen mentioned, or do you have people, how often do you have anyone out observing the well stimulation
Right. So,
on the site? Has anyone been there in the last year, actually been? Do we have enough people to really document? Because I don't want to keep opening up the paper and find out that from 2009 till last year, we have no clue what's going on. Are we staffed up enough with the expertise where people are trained and know what they're looking for? They're on the ground, at least short term.
so you've asked actually a complicated question, and I'll try and make it simple. I'm trying to evaluate actually what, one of the things that I want to do is move the narrative of what the division sort of says and needs to say and needs to be and needs to do, and the reality on top of each other. And I'm evaluating the answer to some of your questions because I'm not sure. There's a number of pieces. The effectiveness of our data management system, common business practices among the districts that are used to operating somewhat independently, and so forth. So that's a broader conversation, and I don't know the answer to that yet. I am similarly concerned with you about that. Specifically to observations of what's going on in the field, I am in the process of reorganizing both District 1 and District 2, our largest districts, so that, and it's a longer discussion, so that we actually have more people in the field more often. To that point, we have, I actually pulled the data from District 1 before I came to the hearing about how much we have been inspecting. And for example, blowout preventer tests, we're near 100% of inspections. Pressure testing of wells, we're near 100%. So we have a lot of people in the field. They're in the field all the time. We have staff coming on board, as you know, your legislation provided for 60 new positions. We've been staffing up and training those staff so that by the time July 1 comes, we will be fully staffed and we will have trained those folks to be on site and understand, you know, all the ins and outs of what they're looking at. So that's ongoing, but we do have staff inspecting. You asked, do we ever have somebody inspecting a frac job? Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yes. And in some cases, it's several staff because we're training them. I've been out to inspect, I've been on site for several hydraulic fracture jobs myself. So the answer is,
If with the 72-hour notice, you have,
we have people that are there. We have people on call all the time, and so the answer is yes. We can and will effectively regulate this activity. It is part of the new division.
is someone also looking at the you're filing a permit versus at the end, the disclosure of what actually went on the similarities or differences, and whether
Yeah.
that permit application is relatively accurate compared
Right.
to what actually went on?
Is the right hand know what the left hand
That would
is
be,
done?
that's the question.
Yeah, yes, Senator, that's part of the integration of the program. That's why we think about it as a comprehensive end-to-end program, and the staff are organized in that way.
So my final question is, and Director Nikodem has sort of been asked this before, sometimes if we're not asking the right question, you're not as forthcoming as we would like in broadening your answers. So tell me something I don't know. Are there new technologies that are coming out there that I should be concerned about? Are there, they never give me this information. Sometimes I get it out of them, and it makes for great stories. So
There was a
Yes.
question there. And
it's
let me offer-
open-ended.
It's open-ended.
So no one's listening.
It's
Just-
counter to, yes, no one's listening,
Just us.
despite the recording and the webcast. And it's counter to our training as government executives to say anything more than you absolutely have to in hearings.
I just feel
That's
like
just
we're
kinda
in a
how-
court
however-
sometimes instead
however.
of an informational hearing.
Exactly. And in fact, I don't think we're actually short shrifting. We're very conscious of your time. But there are a number of things, and sometimes those things are more effectively communicated when we come and sit down with you and your staff for an hour and just kind of go through things in great detail. There was one thing, Senator Allen, that actually you made me conscious of as you were asking your initial question, which is our slides are speaking in our language, and we were saying notices and disclosures, that's actually the language that we use, a notice of intent to drill, a notice for well stimulation. And in fact, your question was about applications versus post-treatment disclosure. Those are the kinds of things that I actually appreciate you pushing back on us, saying, we don't speak your language. So in offering to bring more things before information hearings, you also need to help us figure out that if we're actually communicating what we intend to communicate to you. We will do our very best in that. In terms of upcoming technologies,
Yes, some
actually-
new technology, because we used to talk about just hydraulic fracturing.
Exactly.
Until someone mentioned at a hearing, there's acid matrix, there's
Exactly.
acidization. That wasn't even in the beginning discussion, so we wouldn't have regulated anything else. So SB 4 is meant to be a broad well stimulation of any kind. Are there some additional well stimulations that we are being tested that we don't know about yet?
there are some things that have entered into public discourse, like plasma fracking has been one.
Plasma?
Plasma, which is very high energy. It's actually more like a supersonic toothbrush. It's actually not a well stimulation technique. It's a way of cleaning out wellbore damage. But those are the kinds of technologies. Let me step back just a little bit in answering your question. It's not only the new Dogger, but it's in some ways the new department. It is, and it's not just because we have two geeks in chief before you here. It's because we consider it our responsibility as a regulatory agency to know exactly what's over the horizon in technology. Just one example is I am the chair of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission's Energy Resource and Research and Technology Committee. And the reason I took that chairmanship is precisely because I thought California should be pushing the envelope on what regulators are spending their time looking forward on. So going out in the field with our operators, sitting with Baker Hughes, Schlumberger, Halliburton, going to their laboratories with them and understanding what it is they're working on, what kind of problems. It's not just because we're geeks, it's because we understand that there may be implications for how we regulate what may be coming around the corner. And quite frankly, as I said to you before, Senator, I don't want to be caught flat-footed again, as we were with fracking. So my way of doing that is we're staying on our toes and looking forward.
And I appreciate the moving forward, but I keep thinking about what has gone on in the past that we're still have no idea that's going on. So the question, the data gaps and the record keeping that Senator Allen is you know, makes people wonder what else we may be missing,
Right.
And part of that is,
and we don't know
part of
what
that
that is.
is earning the trust of this body
And
and
that's
the
your
public.
challenge
That
because
is our
of the
challenge.
past, and now we're moving forward.
It is a challenge, but also I think there's some advantages that we have. I have deep connections with the national laboratory system of this country. And in fact, at Livermore, I was responsible for getting technologies that are developed for nuclear security into the oil and gas sector because there's so much overlap. I'm aware of what's going on at Livermore and Los Alamos, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and a number of other places. And they're working with energy companies. They work with the chief technology officers of energy companies to apply very advanced technologies, very advanced fracture mechanics, using supercomputers. So we're plugged into what is going on. And also, they serve as a reservoir for evaluation of things. When we hear something, your staff asked us about this plasma technology. I checked in with the geosciences group at Livermore and asked them to evaluate it. And haven't gotten a chance to get back to you on that yet. But so we not only are connected with the oil companies because we work with them every day, we're connected through what's going on at the national laboratories for cutting edge technology.